The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Morning, everybody, and welcome to Strategy Cafe. Just take a moment for a few more people to log in and just pause a little on this welcome slide just to say hi. Maybe nice just to take a moment just to check in with you all. Nice to see you there. Bert, morning, Chris. Hello, John. Hello, David. Hello, Michael. Hi, Nikki. Hi, Saul. Welcome to this morning's Strategy Cafe. I hope you've got your coffee beside you and you're feeling motivated and perky. So, agenda for today, we're going to start off with a little bit about Alembic in a moment and just introduce you to Matt and Roseanna for those of you who haven't met them. And then we sent around a poll. You might still be able to find the link for that. And if you haven't filled it in, it only takes a minute or two. So it'd be great if you could just find that poll link. And if you haven't filled it in, just take a moment to give us your answers while we get going. And then this is the first of a series of webinars. We're going to be just opening up this conversation about vision and look at some of the really important aspects of that. And today's one is just sort of headlines, what's the bigger picture? So the new landscape, what's changed forever, what's not changed, how to start thinking about a new vision moving forward from now. Maps, a really interesting concept around the inner map and how it relates to motivation that Roseanna's going to be talking us through. Bringing it all together with a summary and some recommendations and next steps. We're going to keep going until 9 o'clock, and then we'll stay on for 10 or 15 minutes for questions. So those of you who have to, get back to another meeting, whatever, welcome just to click off at that point. We'll record it all, and send around the recording, so you can pick up any Q&A afterwards if you need to go. But you're welcome to stay. We'd love to have you until about 9:15, and we'll take Q&A. Please put your questions into the question area on GoToWebinar. And we'll pick those up at the end. We'll keep an eye on them, and if there's things that are coming in which seem really relevant and important as we're going, we'll try and pick them up as we go, but we'll probably pick them up on the top of the hour. So let's get going. I guess you all know me. I'm Nick. I'm founder and MD at Alembic. You probably know, because I keep repeating the story, that I'm the son of a psychotherapist, was brought up in a Buddhist center, and Sarah, who's my co-director and wife and takes part in the business, is a physiotherapist, a bit of the same background as Robin. Morning, Robin. It's lovely to see you, who's also on the webinar. And we kind of pull all those things together in our unique approach to leadership, which starts with the body and the brain, and making sure that everyone understands how to sort of optimize that sort of fundamental tool that we all live in. So that's me. And I'd just like to shout out to Roseanna and Matt. Maybe Roseanna first. Morning. Do you want to just say hi and tell everyone about you?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So it says Roseanna has a finance background. I've been with Alembic since it started 5 years ago. And I think one of the things that has, become really clear to me, working with leadership teams, is around this question of future leadership. So I'm really interested to explore this question of future leadership today. A lot of my work is involved with leadership teams going through transition, so whether that be succession or M&A. And so this question of how to lead in the future always comes up. So it's really nice to give that question some airtime today. So that's me and how I work with clients.
Morning, everyone. I'm Matt, for those of you that don't know me. So I've been with Alembic for around 2 years now. My background's in the healthcare sector, so working mostly in large private healthcare organizations and with new market entrants. I'm one of the 2 senior strategy facilitators and client managers at Alembic, Roseanna being the other one. Similarly, I work on all kinds of complex problems with business leaders and their teams. So we deliver them predominantly through coaching, large group or small team facilitation, or implementation through project management.
Right, let's get going. Thank you, team, for being on with me this morning and helping out. So I'm just going to drop the slides for a second and see if I can competently share with you the poll results. So just bear with me one sec while I get that up. Right. Right, and just let me, Roseanna, Matt, am I sharing the right screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Right, we put a couple of poll out. We thought about this a little bit late, really. So I'm going to leave it open for the whole of the series. So if you haven't filled it in, you've still got time to find that link and complete it. Please share it around. And what we're going to do is just keep it open for a couple of months and just collect results until we get to a higher number of responses, and just keep sharing those and updating them. So, but here's the initial insight from 18 respondents. So a few questions here. Question about clear vision for 2021. Interestingly, most people are a yes on that. Only 4 people who responded had a no, and then same response for communication amongst the team. So concept so far from the 18 respondents is that I know what I'm doing and everyone else knows what they're doing and what we're doing. Confidence is quite nice here as well. This is a little bit more mixed, but there's a really good slice of fairly confident there. With only 1 person responding not confident, which is quite interesting to see that. So extremely confident and fairly confident is the predominant kind of feel. And I guess that makes sense. I guess we are all somewhat expecting, as lockdown is gradually eased, a resurgence of the UK economy. And so there should be strong growth in the next 18 months and something to get ready for. Biggest opportunity for 2021. So you can see some of the responses there: new investment, expanding our remit as an organisation, increasing our own brand sales. Negligible returns on cash, institute recognition, change in direction, clinical practice, increasing our own brand sales, expanding our remit as an organisation. Quite a nice variety of responses there. Biggest challenge, let's just look at these ones at the top here. So flexing our product to client demands as they return, balancing projects to expand while achieving and maintaining momentum, increasing our own brand sales. Interesting stuff. And then motivation, pretty motivated and somewhat motivated, everyone, which is great to see. Team motivation, less sure. Interestingly, less sure here. And then just a couple of questions around office. So by far the majority result is, mixed, part office, part home is the future. And that really chimes, actually probably slightly more dominant result than some of the other surveys from this 18. What do you fear? Loss of culture. Bit of a peak on anxiety and isolation there. And then what are the 2 most important gains? Oh, looks like someone's just filled it in. We've got an extra one. Time saving and well-being being the 2 most important gains. So there you go. That's the sort of initial responses from the questionnaire. So keep filling that in if you haven't done it, and we'll send it around. I'm going to flip back to the presentation. Right, just a quick run through. So this kind of chimes with the business leader report that was done in our group a little bit earlier this year. 90% of business leaders were saying that working from home, flexible arrangements are here to stay, and that very much chimes with what you guys have just said there in the poll, and that this was the #1 pandemic benefit. Really interesting stat there. And I think just in tune with that, we were starting to think about, how the environment has shifted. And so, this landscape has got some of the challenging new features / opportunities, depending on your mindset, but just running through them, virtual culture is obviously here to stay. Climate change, is an unavoidable set of problems and opportunities that, the whole world is just really starting to try and tackle in a better way. And we're expecting much more change on that coming down the track. Rapid digitization, it's accelerated so fast and it's going to continue. Global trade currently really unstable, probably going to stay unstable. It's impacted by all of this stuff. Travel disruption, we all know about that. Virtual relationships. I just, word of warning from the financial environment as business comes back. There's a tendency to overtrade and businesses that have been protected losing that protection. So you've got to watch out for credit risk in the next 18 months and be cautious about debt recovery and managing your debt terms. Could there be political instability after all of this? I'd be surprised if there wasn't. So that could be a big factor. Picked out online education. Just everybody has been learning online. All the students have been learning online. I know there's going to be a return to the classroom, but just that different approach to teaching and learning is here to stay, and we should really riff off that over the next few years and develop it in our businesses. There's a few things there. When we did this exercise, we came up with about 30, and I've just picked out half a dozen or so here. I just kind of want to say that for me, everything, everywhere you look in the landscape has changed. And so you really need to readdress, your strategic factor analysis. And then we'll come on to it later. But people are motivated by things in their environment. And if everything in the environment has shifted, people's inner landscape, their motivation is likely to have shifted. So just check in on how everything has changed with your significant team members and the rest of the team. But one thing has not changed. Humans are 200 to 300,000 years old. It's not that old. And we're here because we're highly adaptive. And that's somewhat due to the unique configuration of the brain. We build something like 2 million synaptic connections per second between birth and around 3, at which point we have over a quadrillion connections in our minds. And that neurome, which is my name for it, that neurome is highly adaptive. It molds itself into new environments. It's a learning and avoiding engine, and the two key functions are activation and depression of connection. So the key thing to remember here is that high levels of emotion, high levels of feeling, and high levels of repetition of behavior are the two most important factors in change, really. And both are vital for embodying new competencies. So going beyond knowing about it in your mind to being able to do it like a fabulous concert pianist, unconscious competency, if you get my drift, is embodied. And that comes from those two things. So, being human and human experience, we've gone through just absolute, tsunami of change in the last year. And we can do that, but a lot of people will not cope in this new environment. And one of our jobs as a leader is to find people who are coping really well and help get behind them and support them as they help others. And to find the people who are not coping well and don't do well in this offline, virtual, unregulated environment and help them with their motivation, their time management, their productivity, etc. I think that's key to all of this. I think it's worthwhile just sort of chatting briefly about my experience as I hand over to Matt. As lockdown happened about this time last year, not long from now, last year, my first experience for the first 3 months was just incredibly busy, helping clients manage their response to the crisis, with lots of different legal jurisdictions and managing furlough arrangements and just talking to hundreds of people to contract how we're going to manage it all and, saving cash. 12 hours a day, constantly on Zoom, completely exhausted, and then took a break. And then things quietened down a little in the summer as the lockdown eased and we started to open up. And for me as a leader, I kind of just had to then take a step back and say, crikey, what is this? Let's just, get out of that crisis mode. What do we do here? This is just incredible. How do we get things back onto a level playing field? And for me, that was a response around fear, crikey, how do I tackle this? And then a quick return to basics. Let's get back to basics. What are the basic things that we can do well? Let's rally everyone around that. Let's just get back to the routines of that. Let's double all of that. A bit like a rugby team that's lost momentum, is on the back foot. They just need to do their plays as well as they can. And so we've just practiced that, I think, since then to try and get a momentum back. And that was kind of my experience. And I guess even sitting here now, I can look back at the year, in a way with a sense of shock. And I don't think there's any problem in admitting that. I think it is just, I feel a sense of shock still at, the experience of the last year. Maybe that's a great place for me to shut up, and having set the scene, I don't know whether that resonates with you, but maybe it does. And I'm going to hand over to Matt and just ask him to talk about this. How do we untangle that and get into this?
Well, that's a good place to jump off. I think you probably find that there's a lot of people that are aware for that level of change and planning ahead. And you're a perfect example for business leaders who are facing all these challenges that we've already touched on. It can be very difficult to carry that ownership and responsibility and lead their organizations through the difficult times and out of the other side. I think one of the things is that it can be very challenging to find space to look ahead. There's so much going on and that's happening around us. And I know a number of clients we've worked with throughout the whole pandemic have found even medium-term planning can be a complete nightmare when the environment is so volatile and unpredictable. So talking to a little bit about what we do at Alembic, we use a methodology that you can see on screen. It's called Now, Where, How. So this is a framework that takes the all-important first step of looking at your current position in some detail, and it's a really critical step to building strategy. So building that base of understanding and clarity is a really critical stage. So it's really important for your outcome to start by being radically honest with yourself in the early stages and getting all of those issues onto the table. It also often pushes people to confront and deal with their emotions about the issues, which can probably be a quite high state in the current environment for some people. And it's particularly important in clearing the way for further constructive discussion further down the line. So ultimately, we're trying to understand the where in Now, Where, How, which is an exercise in looking forward to where we're trying to get to. So this is about pulling your eyes away from what's immediately in front of you and could be obstructing your way forward and doing some planning. That sounds very simple. So it's not a walk in the park, but particularly when predicting the next 6 months is comparable to predicting the lottery numbers at some stages in the pandemic. However, having that vision and understanding of what you're aiming for, both for yourself and for your team, is really important. And there's a number of things you can do to help mitigate the inaccuracy, such as scenario planning. And ultimately, it's really important to stress that strategy is not static. It's a mistake people often make. Continuing with the sports reference, if you managed a football team at halftime and you were 3 down, your strategy going into the second half will probably look quite different from kickoff. So don't be afraid to go back to your strategy and adjust it as much as you like. It's a document or discussion that's ever evolving. So it's kind of in summary, you should start by taking stock of where you are, working to clear your emotions, take that ownership and move forwards towards your vision and your goals. And hopefully that will help you with some clarity, both for yourself internally and for your team.
Roseanna, you had a great question here. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I just really like the point on strategy not being static. It's dynamic. And I'd like to highlight, I suppose, the need to keep that time together as a leadership team. I think what's come evident for us, working with boards and leadership teams, is that it's forced us into spending more time actually working on these quite scary, emotional, difficult things, and we've just got to make decisions about that. And so that has, in the last year, felt quite short term and into problem solving. But I suppose a question that we're starting to enter into as we start to, as you say, Matt, lift our eyes further towards the horizon. I think it's about, okay, how do we keep that time together and honour that? And maybe the nature of those conversations different. They are more towards long term, more towards growth. And it's great to see actually the results on the poll is going, actually everybody is sort of working on the vision, at least for the next 12 months. So that's really good to see. But how do you keep that leadership time together to evolve that continually and keep it alive, keep it dynamic, and making sure that you're ready to respond in a dynamic way? So the question is, how are you all going to ensure that? How are you all going to keep that leadership time? So when things sort of start to temper out and get a bit more, business as usual, how do you keep that focus on the long term?
A really interesting question there. Matt, what do you think? I mean, one of the things I thought about this is that, you know, sometimes as a leader you have to look ahead, and some of the things you're looking at can be quite scary. Maybe one of the scenarios you're looking at is not that great, and it's a possibility. So as a leader, you got to consider that. I guess in my mind, relating that back to Roseanna's points, how much do we tell the team that part of the story? Is it important to be completely honest, or do you think there's a place for keeping some of your thoughts about vision to yourself? Where do you sit on that?
I think it is different for different teams. I think on your point on the scenario planning, I think for some people that can be incredibly useful, to have scenarios and understand your options. It really works well in taking heed of where you are now and looking at those options out in front of you. Some people can find it a little overwhelming, but it's an exercise which is most of the time very useful, particularly when your actual future is very uncertain. On sharing with the team, again, yeah, very, very different for different management teams. You will know your team better than we will. I do think it's important to have somebody on your team that you can talk these things through with. Leadership can be very lonely. It can be difficult at the top, and it's something people don't talk about too often. So I think having somebody, when things are so unpredictable, a second opinion to bounce your ideas off is really important, and can be, incredibly supportive for leaders. Don't feel like you need to be an island.
Yes, I feel like leaders are not immune to any of the emotions that anyone else faces. It's just they maybe happen to have the role, and they have the obligation, which goes with the position. So I think it's a great shout to say, just acknowledge that, find someone to talk through, worries, concerns, anxieties with, at the same time as developing a full range of risk analysis in your vision. I think that brings us nicely to this slide, Roseanna, around that point about the map and where is the person in all of this. Do you want to pick up on this?
Completely. And I think it's, really important that you have a clear vision for the landscape of the organisation. It is definitely worth evaluating the landscape of your people and how they relate to that vision. And so the question here is, what's their map? How do they see the vision? How do they relate with the vision? And what's motivating for them in that? Because they're coming from it at a different perspective. They're contributing to the strategy in a different way. And I suppose the point here is around we've all been through this transition, and so there's the first part of that was sort of ending of that world as we knew it, and sort of letting go of the old ways. Your story at the beginning, Nick, I think is there's like a letting go of that, and having to then look to, okay, well, the old reality's gone, and the new one, how fully formed is that? Maybe I can see it as a vision, but it's not that clear. And so I think as you start to develop that organizational vision, this sort of new beginning becomes clearer, and that brings energy and purpose. But I think the point here is that energy and purpose might have shifted for your team. And so when you talk about motivation, motivation theory suggests that actually any significant transition in your life brings an emotional response, and that actually has the power to shift the direction of our motivation. So typical things like having kids or moving jobs, or a pandemic, they're all things that might shift our focus towards security, towards stability, towards relationships. And I think definitely what's come out in the last year is that our, the craving and the motivation and the drive for actually relationships and connections. So it's interesting to think, how does the organizational picture meet the map on the desires and the motivations of our team? So maybe people are less motivated now about achievement or growth, and more about relationships, and more about how are we protecting the business? How are we protecting our jobs? How are we protecting our own motivations and purpose? So this is just a nice slide that sort of, one shows that, there's a map, and actually we all have a different map. We all see things differently. We all see things in a different way and have a different way of getting there. And, actually having that conversation with your teams around what's driving them, has their motivation shifted? So it's great to see that, on the survey responses that, a lot of you saying that the team are really motivated. I wonder, like, have you thought about the shifts in people's motivations? What are they going through? A common motivation today is around that certainty, connections, and also flexibility. And that gives us a choice. So I think what's happened in the last year has meant sort of a short-term, maybe more to survival. Maybe our motivations have shifted more towards survival. Maybe now we're in a tipping point back towards more long-term and growth. Maybe you as a leader are, maybe the team are still in that short-term survival response. So finding out what their energy is, and then linking it back to the vision that you're creating. So, for everybody coming on the journey with you, we should consider their map. What's their story? What's their part to play? How do the people behind making this vision happen relate to the journey that you're on? How are they going to engage? What are they going to be doing? And ultimately, is that going to be for them? Is that going to serve them? And so I think just starting to have that conversation, and not to assume that, I think as a leader, sort of quite quick to respond back to the long term. The team might not be as quickly behind you as you might think. So always just worth asking and thinking about any shifts in the team's motivations. I think maybe there's some questions on that. I'd be curious to see whether people resonate with those ideas. So do put some questions in the chat if you want to ask me questions on that.
There's a couple of great comments from David Gill, and I think Matt, you had a question for Roseanna on this one. So do you want to ask your question, Matt, and then I'll pick up David's point?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I think looking at motivation is an incredible exercise for your team, and it's a brilliant tool for reflecting individually as well. I've been talking to a few people struggling with motivation in the new landscape, where there's more emphasis on self-drive and motivation than there's ever been before. So I've been steering people towards understanding their time a bit better, and sort of asking them to reflect on their motivation at work and in their personal lives, because there's much more crossover in personal lives as there's ever been as well. I'd be interested to know, Roseanna, if that's also been your experience, and whether you've got kind of a go-to steer when you're speaking to people about their motivation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely common. I think you only need to sort of read a LinkedIn article on motivation, and it will talk to that. And I think everybody's experience has been very different. So you have to meet the person where they're at. So there's no sort of blanket approach. But I think there's an interesting way of thinking about why people do things. So one way of looking at it is, I'm moving away from a pain. So this has been a difficult experience that I'm moving away from, or there's something in the future that excites me, and I'm moving towards that. And so we can talk about what is motivating, but sometimes that's actually too big a question, because that's too all-encompassing. And actually it's finding out what the pain points are that person is demotivating for them, and getting them to sort of come away from that. Or are they more of a towards and have a focus on what is going to sort of drive them in the future? And I think understanding that gives you a sense of where they're at. But I think people are feeling demotivated. The other thing as well is that, maybe we all had development plans a year ago, and they've just sort of all gone out the window. And there's, that was probably really motivating for me to have a plan of how I'm going to develop over the next year. And that just hasn't happened for most people because, you know, the training's not been there and we've all had to sort of respond and sort of cope. But I think actually resetting those goals is really important and breaking those down so that you can sort of work in more smaller chunks and just sort of, you know, it's like ticking off your to-do list, just sort of getting things done and getting a reward, you know, a positive feeling of ticking things off, a positive reward of just achieving little things. So they're just some things that I think help around the conversation around demotivation particularly.
That's great, thank you. I want to move the conversation on a little bit. I think it's a good kind of reference into the change success model. But I just want to pick up a couple of points in transition from David Gill, who's here said, emphasizing the importance of being a team. You know, members offer different skills and value, but keep reinforcing the key of getting through the storm is about working together, being tolerant and empathetic. I think Empathy Week we're in at the moment, and is a really powerful skill for leaders to develop as we move away from that sort of hero CEO kind of mode and into really understanding people better. Everything you've been saying, Roseanna, requires us to tune in and understand the map of our colleagues, I think. I think he makes a great point. He also says it's dangerous to look too far ahead. And I want to challenge that a little bit. I think in times where there's a lot of volatility, kind of you move into agile mode, which does mean short term, you know, little steps, baby steps, as you work your way through, you know, what can be a complicated environment. So your kind of your chunk size or the, you know, the next challenge has to be faced sort of head on. But I think we've always said that. I think it can be difficult to look up ahead in those sorts of times because it's hard. And I don't think that gets us off the hook. However, I think it's still important to check, you know, that the overall direction of travel is right. Otherwise, your kind of short-term problem solving can end up leading you down a wrong alley. So it's really important to me to keep checking in. I don't think you have to set your goals too tightly, but you need to make sure that you are on track and it's still motivating in terms of the total journey. And I think, you know, I think that links to this next slide. This is our change success model. I think reflecting on everything everyone has said, as you get started looking up and thinking about where you are, you know, and looking around and what is my journey and what's the story, one of the things we've always said is start by just looking at your feet very, very clearly and understanding where you are. So radical honesty about now and finding out exactly what's happening in the environment, especially around your people, is really important. So to always value a conversation, this model is a great diagnostic. We're going to share a link after the webinar to you all, so you can do a sort of now diagnostic on your own business and share that with us if you wish to. And it helps people score around this really important question that I see Robin is also picking up on around beliefs. So, you know, do I believe in this new mission that we're on? Do I believe in the business's, you know, story and my part in it? So, and am I supported in that? So do my significant others agree with me and support me? What's my attitude to this? That's like team members and me. How difficult do I think it's going to be? And is that demotivating or motivating? On the top right hand side, you've then got how ready are we? So just to check in to make sure your business planning is complete and coherent. You know, do all leaders support what we're doing? Have we really articulated why we're doing this? Do we need to check back in what's in it for people? And that's motivation. It's not just money. Is this the right process? Is there a better one? And how confident do we feel about moving forwards? Some great questions. And both those top two on beliefs and readiness then feed into this concept of capability. And the idea here is that capability only gets released fully when beliefs have got a high score and readiness has got a high score. So whether you've got capability or not, its release into projects comes when the other two scores are high. And capability is split evenly between individuals. So that embodied skill, you know, the higher level of mastery and performance in each of the jobs, like the expert level. And then organizational, you know, what's your brand? You know, what's your network? What are your relationships like as an organization? What's your IP like? You know, what are the capabilities you've got? You can see just at the top right there, a few little words. You've got to score really high to be ready on this. So 23 out of 30 for beliefs, 25 out of 30 for readiness, 30 out of 40 is for capability. So the bar is high. And I think it's worth just checking in on that if you want to get into that, success zone. Just conscious of the time and just running a little bit past 9. I'm just going to give you the wrap-up slides, and then we'll come back to questions. So please pile your questions in and we'll stay on and answer them. But just a quick summary of the discussion. So people haven't changed, but they are adaptive. So just watch out for those who are struggling to adapt. And also there'll be people in the environment who really thrived, so they can be helpful. But do they know your vision? Do they know where you're going? Can they be influencers for your leadership story and help in that way? They'll definitely be connecting and reaching out. And then just everything in the environment has changed, so change your analysis. I think risk is a really great strategic tool, and it's a great time to do risk analysis right now. But then also update your strategic factors and understand, where the environment has shifted for you. Opportunities and threats are in there, so the SWOT comes up. Lift your vision, definitely short-term detail. So next 3 months, next 6 months, next year detail. Longer term is harder, but I don't think you're off the hook on that. I think you've still got to look at the difficult picture ahead and check in that the journey is correct. And then also motivation. Roseanna's great point. What's going on inside in people's internal maps? Can you understand that? How do you get to that? And that role for empathy. And then just recheck your position on the change success model. I remember listening to a really motivational guy years ago who said, when you want to play tennis at a really high level, you don't keep your eye on the scoreboard, you keep your eye on the ball. That's a great point. In life, the ball is the person. So keep your eye on the person is our kind of summary point. Don't forget the team member. Don't make assumptions about where they're at. Check. Don't make assumptions about where your customers are at. Check. Don't forget their personal story as part of all of this. And I think that's a really nice kind of final point here. So thank you for staying with us. We have 3 more sessions coming up, which you'll find on the website, and there'll be an email to show you where you can register for these. We're going to deep dive around culture, communication, place. Then we're going to move on and look at identity, belonging, brand, and motivation. And then with those 2 kind of done, we're going to then start to look at productivity, effective online supervision, high-performing virtual teams. And we've already done a session on this, which is on our YouTube site for the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which touches on some tips for that last session. So if you want to grab some of those tips now, go check out our YouTube channel. There's some great stuff there. Okay, so I'm going to come back to questions, and thanks everyone for staying with us who can. David Gill has just said demotivating tends to be a gradual process, whereas positivity and being inspiring can have an instant effect. Don't forget that. It's a great point. Roseanna and Matt, do you want to come in on any of these questions?
I mean, I think that is a really interesting point about demotivation. I think it might feel like that, and I think you sort of look for problems and demotivating instances. I think it's really interesting. So I think the question you're raising is, are we aware of when that is a motivational event and that sort of boosted us? And I think the granularity on both sides of the coin, motivation and demotivation, is really important. And so, having a little mental gauge of the day, and what was good, what was bad, I think challenges, what we're doing and what that's serving us for. And I think it does link back to beliefs. What do we believe is the right thing to do and focus on? So catching demotivation quickly is the point there, which I think is really nice. And you don't wait for the big event to happen. So the question is, what can we do to spot signs? And I think that is looking for what is motivating in that person and focusing there.
Yeah, I agree. It's motivation is so fundamental. It can make your life so much easier, understanding your motivation and your team's motivation. There's something which is there in the background every day. And just understanding in yourself how to steer towards your motivators and help to steer away from your demotivators can make your life easy and more fun. It's just that going through the exercise of trying to identify them.
I was just going to add about just giving yourself a bit of a break as well. So when you're feeling demotivated, you're like, right, I've got to like find what's motivating for me, and like, oh, that sort of is quite a big feeling, and actually just giving yourself a bit of an allowance to just let that happen and just sort of notice it, reflect on it. But I think feeling flat is a common thing. So not like demotivated, but just not motivated. I just feel very flat. And the point I was going to make was around tiredness. So tiredness can blur the clarity of what's going on for you. So I think the more sleep you get, the more clarity. The sense of flatness might still be there, but you might just get more clarity on why. And so I think sleep is a really important thing to not neglect.
Yeah, I think they're great points, and I think David's point about motivation being, potentially quite fragile or volatile and move quite quickly is a really important one. It just kind of really tunes into the human side of us. You kind of almost think of motivation as a factor in a strategy diagram. It's not, is it? It's something felt, and you can have motivation at 9, and then something happens, and you can feel flat at 9:35. So just recognizing that the innate essence of that is volatile, but there are some sort of elements of it which are more enduring in people, and understanding the human side of it speaks to a point made by Bert as well, which I'm interested in your views on this. He talks about this in terms of engagement. Like my comment here would be, just to wrap up quickly on this, is from a leadership perspective. The strategy can be tough to analyze, but it's doable, and there is a sort of known methodology for that. And you can get help, but strategy can be done. The thing that everyone really struggles with is mainly called execution, but I'm going to just use a different word that Bert's used, which is engagement, because I think that's a better word. Once the strategy is set, the really important question is about that. It's about how motivating is it for people in your organization and for your customers and for your investors. And if it's motivating and they can see how to get involved, they'll get engaged, right? So I'm just curious about that from, Matt and Roseanna, your point of view. Have you got any observations about how to make sure that we're asking the right questions about motivation and checking in on specifically on engagement?
Yeah, I think this is something which is really important to do when you're pulling strategy together. If you can't engage, then you will not implement well. It will be a rocky road. Obviously, in building strategy, there are objectives that all organizations have to reach, financial and otherwise. They're the things which are generally easier to put down on paper. Your board might tell you how much profit you're to make. You might have expectations around other things. But understanding what drives and motivates your staff is more difficult. It should really be part of your planning right from the grassroots of saying we want to make strategy, is understanding what motivates your staff, and right from low level staff in any department all the way up to the directors that are helping guide the strategy. If you don't get it right, you're going to have an absolute nightmare in the implementation.
I also think it's the IKEA effect. Maybe lots of people have been doing DIY in the last year, but I think the IKEA effect is all around. If I've built that, I'm more attached to it. So when it comes to strategy, I'm more engaged in that project, I'm more engaged in working hard, and I'm more engaged when it goes wrong to help sort it out as well. So there's less of a disconnect there. So I think just remember, what of the strategy can be delegated, and we always encourage that. And I think leadership teams always learn something new about their team, thinking about something differently, and they end up sort of going with it. And it's they've taken things in a different direction, which is so valuable.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually just really engaging and really nice to see. So do remember the IKEA effect. I think there is a lot of attachment there in the contribution that people make.
I think that's a lovely point. Just conscious of time, maybe we should just wrap up for folks. Just want to pick up on some nice comments. Michael Shapiro, thank you very much, Michael, for your comment here. It's important to encourage teams to get away from their desks and out in the fresh air. They need to realise the world will still be there in an hour. Yeah, I completely agree. And it was an opportunity yesterday for me to go and look at the primroses and check in on the early autumn buds for an hour. It was lovely. definitely felt better after that. And then Robin Silverton, hello Robin, and thank you very much for a comment. Compassion around periods of demotivation is key. I completely agree. As a leader, I think really understanding this is to approach it with no judgment and just understand. So empathy, however you practice that, questioning, listening, actually listening properly and understanding, and tuning in, no judgment. That's a really powerful skill. But I think also, to the earlier point about scary, some of the scary things that you have to think about, such that some things are confidential and must remain confidential. Nevertheless, our encouragement is, to Roseanna's point, is that to go as far as you can towards authenticity, towards honesty, and tell the hard truths as well as the opportunities, because again, it builds trust, and that's also really helpful in empathy. And there's so much information that can flood through your people into the strategic picture building if you can bring them in. And so therefore, authenticity, openness, transparency, I think is really important. You should push it as far as you can. And everyone has to make their judgment on what the line is there, because there is a line. There's definitely a line, and it's the most difficult line to balance on as a leader between openness and privacy. So we're going to wrap up there. Thank you, everybody, for joining in this morning, for all your comments. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, David, Gil, for your lovely points throughout. Saying here, don't flog a dead horse if a team member doesn't get it. Engage with those who do get it. Too many leaders spend too much time trying to convince those resistant to change. I have a counterpoint to that, which is, what is their resistance? I think that's a really interesting question to ask. What is that? Because there might be something really powerful there in the resistance. If you can be empathic and open to what is it, there could be a lesson there for you. And thank you, Libby. Thank you, everybody, for staying on. And thank you, Matthew and Roseanna, for your awesome comments and contributions this morning. This will be up on YouTube in a few hours' time, and we look forward to seeing you on the next section, where we're going to be talking about culture, communication, and place. Hope you all have a lovely day.
Take care.
Yes.